Welcome back, folks. It is another wonderful day to be above the green stuff, as they always say. Unless, of course, you're not. And there might be people missing you, and they might be grieving over you. And we're going to talk about grief, what that looks like, maybe across cultures or in different settings. It may not even have anything to do with losing anybody, but we're going to talk about it today, so stick around. Yes, welcome back to Two Chaps, Many Cultures, the #1 show on the business of culture and the culture of business. Monday. How are you, pal?
I'm alive, and that's a good thing for a lot of people. I'm not sure it's a good thing for all people, but I think for a lot of people that I know, I think that's a good thing. Welcome, everybody. Glad you're tuning in. And let us know where in the world you're tuning in from. It's always good to know how far our reach is and where people in the world are watching. Or if you're not watching live, you might be watching the recording. You may do some, I learned a new word this past half year. You may be doing some asynchronous watching. Asynchronous. That is apparently the word that's been used for that. So let us know where in the world you are.
Asynchronous. I don't
know. Apparently I didn't learn hard enough. So asynchronous.
Asynchronous.
Which my daughter will tell me whenever I go into her room and say, "Hey, why aren't you at your desk? Aren't you supposed to be in class?" "Dad, I told you this multiple times. Wednesday is asynchronous." I said, "Okay." All right.
Consider yourself told. Consider yourself told.
I am being told.
Good.
So what are we talking here about today? We're talking about grief, and yet you see us pull some nonsense jokes out of our hats. So aren't we being serious about this? And isn't this a somber matter? Well, I don't know. Is it?
Well, we, of course, want to, and yes, we do probably don't take ourselves too seriously, but there are some things we should take serious. And of course, we don't want to make light. If you are grieving for somebody at the moment and you've had some loss, and some of us have, and you know, we respond to it in various ways. We respond to it through our own emotions, how we're feeling in and of the moment. But I guess what we're you know, it was just came out of an interesting listen this morning to a topic on a radio show which was talking about grief, and they didn't just touch on the loss of a person. They actually touched on some of the cultural aspects of it, and perhaps is there an argument that we are expected to grieve in a certain way, therefore we follow those templates or the traditions, and are we doing it right if we don't do it that way? If we don't, you know, some cultures like the Irish go out and drink and party, you know, they celebrate. To them, that's a celebration of the life. And other cultures are quite visceral in their expression of the grief, through even hiring more professional mourners to wail and scream at the. Now we're not. And certainly all those are valid because they've come out of either faith traditions or other heritage aspects and formed by the culture, all through this commonality that we share as humans, that when somebody is physically removed from us through death or other separation, then we feel this sense of loss, and it's a natural human reaction to do that. Yeah.
Right. And I think I listened to at least half of that program, and to give you guys full disclosure, it is I think it's a podcast or a radio program by BBC. It's called Crowd Science, and the title of this particular episode is called "Why Does Grief Leave Me Feeling This Way?" You can Google it, or we may even put the link in the comments here. And it poses that question. Is there a societal expectation for an emotion that we have when we lose something? And if so, if there is if we're taught to feel a certain way, or if that's a societal construct that teaches us how to respond to the loss of somebody. And usually the grieving process that they're referring to is loss of a loved one, of a person that has been torn from us, either by natural causes or some accidents, or what may be, whatever may be the reason for the loss. So is there a societal construct that teaches us, okay, this is what you do, these are the steps and the emotions that are expected of you when that happens? And I had that same question when people in my family, some close relatives, passed away a couple of years ago, and I was surprised that not every family member had the same emotional state during that grieving process, during the process of organizing the funeral and going through all the logistics and the organizational steps of dealing with somebody's death, right? And I thought I was going to walk into a sob fest in my family. I was expecting my mom in that scenario, who had lost her mother. I was expecting her to be devastated and in tears and really on edge and really going through some emotional roller coasters, and none of that happened. My mom was very composed and very structured and very measured, and that surprised me, right? So, and I think many of you have had similar experiences. You expect yourself to respond to a loss in a certain way, and you may expect your family members or your friends to have a certain set of emotions. And then when the loss does happen, maybe your expectations are not met. So how much of it is culturally determined, and of how much of it is our personal journey through these emotions? And I don't have the answer. I'm curious about this. Do we have answers, Brett? Is there a framework that would explain this, or is experiencing loss such a unique personal experience that it's hard to put those frameworks on that?
Yeah. Well, you know, someone said that grief is the price we pay for love, right? So we always want love. We have these direct connections as humans. But I think hearing you tell that story, I mean, and listening to what I listened to this morning made me think about the almost scripted version I offer clients when I'm talking about preparing them for this adventure, going off and living in another country, because it's been proven that actually is an expression of grief also, not a grief of a loss of a loved one or anything, but it might be the grief of the presence of the people that are close to you and you have around you every day. It may even be the loss of the person you look at in the mirror, the loss of identity, the grief for the person, this wonderful professional person you knew back in your home country that was so secure and able to perform at the very highest level. And now with the discombobulation of living and practicing your craft in another culture, this becomes kind of a grieving process for, like, who am I now? What's my identity? So there's a whole bunch of things to fit into. And they questioned this morning, because I've used this myself, and this is why I probably will maybe not use it. But when you say that story, I'm assuming that everybody may experience grief the same way. So I'm putting it in that framework. But perhaps the people I'm sitting with, like you say, your family, there's certain people that don't experience grief in that way. So they said
to give you more context on this, when my grandmother passed, I think I was the one sobbing the most.
Yeah.
I was much more in my emotions than my mom, my grandmother's immediate daughter was. I was like, I was wondering, so why am I feeling more emotions, or why am I showing more outward emotions than my mother, who spent a lot more time with her mom than I did? So
yeah.
Weird, right? Or not?
Yeah, well, I don't know, and there's no right or wrong. That's the whole beauty about this. But I think it was interesting this morning. Somebody said, you know, and I put this up specifically. I wanted to share this. These are the emotions, right? that this kind of path of emotions that we say people go through, and they go through grief. And an expert said this morning, this is actually not where it came from. This came from people that were dying themselves. When you find out you're facing your mortality and you go through denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, and then it was co-opted by the people who were talking about the process of grief. So
yeah, I think it's the Kübler-Ross model, right? So it's the 5 stages of grief, and as you said, it's been co-opted. There's bookshelves full of it about the self-help in the self-help section of your local bookstore, and I've been wondering about this myself, because is that really something that we go through in a step-by-step, and once we're done with denial, we're gonna live in the anger field, and then once we pass through the anger field, we enter the bargain hall, and after we're done with the bargain hall, we sulk in our depression hole? I don't think so. I think we can what's the word? We can circulate or oscillate through all these 5 states and all these 5 emotions many times over.
Miss some altogether. And I think that's the expectation that people are, I think they were saying that people are viewing you from the outside. They're expecting you to express your grief in a certain way, and it may be through this. So people, I'm sure they're not sitting there with a little notebook going, okay, is this person in anger? Better tick the boxes, right? This is the process. But the expectation is that if you don't show up that way, then are you not grieving in a proper sense, in your culturally, appropriate way? And that's an interesting point to me. So I think that is something I as a facilitator, I want to stop myself doing, and just assuming that people are, when you go through cultural adaptation. And I certainly went through probably 2 or 3 of these things when I went through my adaptation coming to this country. So they definitely occur. There's no, we want to validate that people do go through this when you're separated from your loved ones, even as an expat. Because I did, and I tell people that, but maybe we want to get out of this process of saying, and it's definitely going to happen to you the same way. No, it's not. It's just everybody's at their own. And I guess the ability to give them the heads up and say, once you start feeling these emotions, you can take real good strategies to counteract them. And it doesn't mean you kind of have to do it just to tick a box. Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are initially a little bit skeptical to accept the grieving process template or the grieving process analogy for experiencing the losses you encounter when you move abroad for work. I think it would almost, for some of us, it might be frivolous to compare my own personal professional journey with that of losing a life in the family, right? So it might be, there might be a hesitancy to draw these parallels. And yet, as you say, Brett, when you give up your home that you spent, I don't know how long to make it yours, and maybe paid a lot of money to make it yours, or you have developed these social connections around your home, and this is what feels like home to you because it gives you that sense of security, predictability, and safety. And now you're moving away from that. You're tearing yourself out of that context. That is a loss. That's a grieving process, right? So I remember I actually had a family. It was a mobility cultural training program, and they were from southeastern Germany, close to Austria, and they lived in a very rural area in Germany, and they lived on an old farm building. And the wife in that family, she was deeply rooted in that community. The way they were living meant so much to her, and she didn't realize it until her husband was sent overseas. And now they found themselves in the southern part of the United States, and she hated it. She was first in that denial, and then mostly in that anger field of not being happy about her living conditions abroad, that everything she had built in her home culture meant so much to her that she was unable to get over that loss. And it was a long story, but the result of that story was that her husband's assignment was aborted, that he didn't serve the entire term that he was contracted for, and they went back home because it was about to split the family in half. So that it can go that far, right?
Yeah, and we're not here to say that's a failure. Determining failure as a construct is a bit harsh in that settings. These are real emotions, so you have to validate them. And I think the other good point about this morning is that just as you said, some people are a little skeptical, but you can make the connection because the neurologist mentioned that there is a connection between how the amygdala responds when we lose somebody. This is the survival instinct of us as a species. Once we lose somebody, we're faced with mortality, and we were drawn to grieving their loss because we realize that there is something missing from our lineal pathway in our mortality. And now it doesn't get to that level when you're in another country, but it is our amygdala. It's still at work. It's our grief process in our amygdala saying, what is, we've disconjointed our natural path of life, what we thought it was going to be. Now we're in a country that speaks a different language, and the kids are having to deal with all, making new friends and things like this. So there is a kind of a connection, and I can see, as somebody who's gone through it myself, it is the same feeling because, I remember measuring this against the way I felt when I lost, say, my grandmother. In your case, the same, at a kind of early age, early 20s. But yeah, so the connections are there, and I think they're different for everybody. And it's for facilitators and for people out there that are contemplating these moves and have been through them. Not all size fits all, but I think it's just an interesting take, and it was a really interesting podcast. I put the link in the
I saw it.
It's worth a
listen. I mean, start listening to it once we're done here, but then listen.
Don't switch us off.
Now, I think there are a few aspects to consider aside from this theoretical concept that we just hashed out here. Some surface level cultural aspects to consider when you move abroad or when you do experience grieving processes in different cultures. As Brett said, the Irish would dance and sing all night long, and probably imbibe a little as well. And then there's also other surface level cultural aspects to consider with, for instance, what type of music. Is it upbeat or is it downbeat? Is it a somber music? Is it more depressive music? Or is it a more festive tune that you would hear around a funeral or any type of grieving ceremony? What color schemes are we using? For us in the Western world, European, North American world, the color black is often associated with celebrating death, or not celebrating death, but celebrating the life of someone who's left us.
I didn't mean to wear black today, by the way. It was just coincidence.
But in other cultures, it's exactly the opposite. It's white, right? I will never forget my parents coming home from a visit in Indonesia, telling me about the funeral procession that they witnessed with loud and cacophonic gambala music and people dressed in white. No, it was gamelan music. Sorry, that's the term, gamelan. And it was exactly the opposite of what you would expect of a somber affair in Central Europe, right? So, is a culture prone to emotional expression outwardly, or does emotion live inside, or only reserved for a close circle of people, and we don't show that to a greater public? Some of these factors are to consider when we're talking about a grieving process, and that's where we started off as, right? So that there are the cultural frameworks that set the expectation of what am I supposed to do, or what would be the appropriate thing for me to do now that I'm grieving, right? Is it okay for me to walk around in public and bawl my eyes out? Or is that something that I reserve for my immediate internal circles, and outside I will keep a straight face, right? So that is, of course, affected by our culture.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Yvonne, thank you very much for joining us. my husband and I just republished a book called Voices of the Grieving Heart, an anthology of over 160 poems. Poems are great when you're in that mood. The poems are fantastic. Essays and artwork from 83 contributors from around the world who have lost loved ones. One contributor lost her dad at the age of 8. She was in Britain and was told, don't complain, don't make a fuss, which is, you know, sometimes we say this about the people in the UK, maybe a stiff upper lip, that type of approach to these events. And she wishes she had been given the chance to express her loss loudly and communally. So there is the opposite effect, that sometimes what you feel inside, you're not allowed, you're not feeling the ability to express, and especially at a young age, it can really have an effect if you're not kind of able to express and process these emotions. At least talk with somebody. It's a difficult part. So thank you, Yvonne, for that input. I would love to let's go back to that, the book, The Voices of the Grieving Heart. I think I'd love
Yvonne,
that.
feel free to post a link in the comment box, wherever people can find that. Feel free to post that. That would be a great resource for people who want to dive deeper into this topic. Thanks for sharing that.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Wonderful.
Awesome.
Yeah. Great. Well,
also,
I mean, good topic. Thank you. I agree, Yvonne. And but it's one we could probably spend. We should probably get some experts in to talk about, because I think it's fascinating to process these discussions.
I mean, I don't want to get us into a sad place here, but I was reminded of this, I think, this past week. The German government did a public ceremony commemorating the lives lost in the corona pandemic, and it was a very somber, low-key affair, right? And as I was reading the reports about it, I thought, it's a very German thing to do.
Yeah.
It was not a big fanfare. It was not big and loud, right? And other cultures handle that differently. And I think in when I say our, Brett and I, we live in North America, and we're both are. Thanks for sharing that, Yvonne. Awesome.
Thank you, Yvonne. Yeah.
We were both raised, and we live in what would be referred to as a Western cultural context. Death and our mortality are not necessarily things that follow us in our daily lives, because that is something that is almost in Western cultures often I'm not sure if I'm not ready to have this conversation. I'm alive and well now, and let's make the best of my day now, and self-actualization and me, and let's go about our days. And the perpetuality of our lives, which includes death, is not something that is openly discussed, or that is something that is something that lives in our day-to-day activities in Western cultures. Let's just go south of the border of the United States, go to Mexico. They have a whole celebration around this, right? The Dia de los Muertos, where death is a part of life. It is seen as something that is the yin to the yang, right? And the way cultures look at the end of life, and how we treat those who are in let's say in the final quarter of their lives, or the final 10th of their lives, how do we deal with those who will leave this plane of existence in the very near future? That is also indicative of our culture, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Many different heritages and practices that have survived many millennia, and we're a strange breed, us humans. Sometimes we face these things, sometimes we don't. And I think the other message this morning is, it's all about closing the loop. It's all about the story. It's about the longing and the brain trying to make some reason of our mortality, where perhaps there is, no reason, and it's a mystery, and that's a mystery at different levels for everybody. And let's leave it at that.
I like your point about closing the story, because the fact that we're talking about somebody that left us, my grandmother, your grandmother, we're telling that story. That means we're closing the loop for ourselves, and we are honoring the memory of those who are not with us right now.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean they never existed. Doesn't mean that they have a different existence now. Who knows? But we're telling the story, which helps us close that circle. Right?
Absolutely. And just to close this circle, Yvonne, perfect. We needed to know where everybody is, and Yvonne is in San Francisco Bay Area, which part of the world I absolutely love. A nice spot. And I hope Carl hasn't rolled in too bad today and made it cold. But that's what the fog does. That's what Carl does, unfortunately, in San Francisco. Welcome, Carl, if you're there. Well, it's a bit early for Carl. It's probably only 1 o'clock. It's 1:42 in the afternoon. A bit early for Carl.
Oh, well.
Carl the Fog, by the way. Somebody asked me that. What do you keep calling him Carl? Well, apparently, Carl, the fog in San Francisco is a name. He's called Carl. You know, he sneaks up on you. There's somebody who was caught, you know, with his shorts and T-shirt on the pier once before.
Carl with a C or with a K?
I think it's K. Actually,
and this is going to close that loop. This is going to close that story because Carl was my grandmother's last name. There we go.
There you go. How about that? Thanks. Interesting. So, Carl, we're not going to close the loop. We're going to leave it up to the audience. Write in the comments, is it Carl with a C or Carl with a K? I'm going to bet money it's K, but that's just me.
Well, and I'm not a betting man, so you win.
not even a little like bottle of something, I don't know, to celebrate the passing of this episode.
Yes, I have actually have two. I have two triple Trappist bottles in my fridge. So
very nice.
There we go.
Well, that's another one. Two Chaps, Many Cultures. Thank you very much. Happy Monday on a, I think I think not a sad topic. I think it's a good topic to discuss.
It is.
Thank you very much. We'll be back tomorrow with another topic and some announcements on Clubhouse coming up. We've been exciting little event coming up in a couple of weeks on Clubhouse, Open Town Hall, featuring us two ugly mugs, even though on Clubhouse you don't actually have to put up with our faces, which is great. Fantastic. That's a bonus. so
if you say so, thank you.
That's it. We're out. Thank you very much, folks.
See you tomorrow.
Bye.